Welcome to the Shared Practices podcast. We are on season 6 on growth, but what happens a lot of times with the seasons of our podcast is we'll get into a topic and then we'll move on, but occasionally we get a guest on who like straddles a couple different topics and we can cover multiple things. So we have the privilege today of talking with Dr. Nicole Vane. Nicole, introduce yourself.
Thank you for having me. I have been practicing since 2003 in San Diego. Really wanted a group practice model or a partnership buyout. So I was in 2 long-term associate positions where I was going from 1 day, I worked my way up to 5 days, was like the loyal, happy associate. What can I do? Please dangle me a carrot. And neither one would ever offer a letter of intent or anything. So
this is twice in a row that you did
twice
that.
in a row, yeah, where I got strung along. Moved into another practice, same thing, but you're like anything you learn. This time I set my expectation. This is what I need. They brought me on to do a potential partnership. And again, at the 1-year mark, it was still nothing. And so I was looking and I found a startup. I mean, a real startup. And it wasn't what I thought I wanted. It was the right location. This is a competitive market. So I bought a 2-op underwater practice that was producing annually after 10 years of being open, $200,000 a year annually.
Oh, in San Diego.
In San Diego. And so, it's a mom. She's a mom. She had 3 kids. Her heart just wasn't in business. So it was really hard for me to get funding.
Yeah.
Because I was used to working I ideally was looking for a 6 operatory space.
Yeah.
Because I like to work. I've worked in a lot of offices where they were like huge PPO driven, where I had a couple columns at once. So I got this little 2-op practice, and then I added a 3rd op and a 4th op and a 5th op, and I kept renegotiating my space. It was like freaking Tetris. I'm like, maybe I can fit an op in the bathroom. Yeah, like literally crazy town with some of the design issues I encountered.
Yeah.
Bought the liquor cabinet off the restaurant next door and move my front office. Like, you wouldn't believe the changes. But what was hard was, again, getting the funding, because when you're failing, when you're buying, and you've gone through some acquisitions with the practice, I had my production numbers that would support me getting a large loan, but no one would finance a failing practice.
Right.
So I had very little working capital. How
did you end up getting it done? Did you have to go SBA? Did you find a local bank?
Yeah, and then a lot of it through Patterson, which I wouldn't recommend for anyone.
Okay.
In the regard with any of the large companies, I was just so happy to keep evolving this dream that I'm like, I want that 8-deck chair and those cabinets. And it was literally like, great, we'll finance you. And it wasn't, I didn't negotiate on the payments or the interest rate. I was just so happy to get a new op with an extra unit in it. So now I could do more. So it was always my vision leading first and not like shopping the numbers or anything like that. And this was in 2014. So the podcasts that I would have, and the avenues now that I would have used weren't accessible to me. So I kind of did it in a way that I wouldn't recommend for everyone, but it worked out. I totally outgrew my space in the first 2 years.
Wow.
And you're like, what do I do?
Right.
So it's created a lot of issues with my vision, systems, things that we had talked about getting into today.
Totally.
So by year 2.5, we were grossing 1.8 and collecting like 1.6.
Okay. So yeah, you've grown this practice from 200,000 to 1.6.
Yeah.
Just sheer chaos.
Yeah, because like I mean, you go from a practice with no hygiene to 9 days of hygiene by end of year 1. So like just the whole hiring, interviewing, training, flow, even getting the issues down with training your front with, you can't have 2 new patients side by side.
Right.
Because they're going to be sharing the FMX, that room shares an extra unit. I can't do 2 exams at the same time and do a
Right.
quality exam. We don't have a treatment coordinator to present. So all those little kinks that are big kinks
Yeah.
that came up created a lot of chaos for me.
Yeah.
That
I can imagine. And on top of that, just, you kind of mentioned that you're taking out different loans and different packages from Patterson, this, that, and the other. So it's just everything's all over the place. Stress levels wise, like, has this been kind of nonstop stressful since it opened, or have you had some breathing moments?
uh, you know, um, the breathing moments were what we were addressing off air. In hindsight, pain points for me, pain points for
Mhm.
the practice, because I so desperately was wanting to give everything away because I was so busy with the dentistry.
Mm,
And when we talk about goals and visions, I was listening to something about external versus internal motivators.
right.
And some of it's just trying to put up numbers to figure out what you can do, like to prove to yourself and prove to everyone. Um, with the end goal being in mind of like financial freedom, uh, puffing your chest, like, look what I did, this is
Right.
great. But the end result not being internally satisfied.
Not being
You
happy. I mean,
feel,
it's like,
yeah, you're just like a shop worker, you know? You felt like a factory, and I really wanted to lean on and build team, but the fact was I was completely hands off. I wasn't onboarding people, I wasn't training, I was hiring for said skill, and that leads to a lot of issues in a practice, a lot.
was there any particular moments or periods in time where that all came to a head and you realized, like, oh man, I have a lot of work either personally or a lot of work on my team?
Yeah, both. Um, at first, the side of me that's really evolved is the first couple years, it was always like, man, that was a bad hire. But
Mm,
I didn't even hire them. I let my other two front interview them. And how am I supposed to know that they wouldn't know how to do this? And like, man, Becky at the front said that Joanne really sucked. And I'm just gonna take so we're not gonna miss Joanne. We're gonna find Melissa. And
mm,
Melissa's gonna come in and be our here. Like, but when you're hands off and I wasn't doing the interviewing, I didn't know the right questions to ask. It was just like, oh, you know, Dentrix, and oh, you've done this for 7 years. Great. Can you sit there and answer the phone? And my expectation is going to be you're going to slowly understand how I want it done. That doesn't set anyone up for success.
mm.
So there have been a lot of team explosions, a lot of toxic individuals that I invited in and allowed because I was just doing my dentistry.
Right.
Um, so I lost some good people because of some bad ones. And uh, at the time, I just totally I knew it, but I didn't know what else to do.
Yeah. And especially once you've got someone on your team who is not pulling their weight and is bringing negativity and toxicity to the office, um, you feel it from the other team members who you really need to stick around because they're picking up the slack. They're the ones dealing with the extra work, um, and you're burning them out. And so
And
sometimes
then
there's
like the whole C player thing, like you have A players and C players can rise or get off the bus.
right.
But if you have a bunch of C players, the A player eventually is going to be like, I'm going
I'm
to move
done.
on to other A players, or I'm going to level down to the energy of my coworkers.
Yeah, and that, like, show up and just kinda do the minimum and check out. If to see an A player kinda drop down to that level is really disheartening.
Yeah,
Um,
I definitely have some regrets on a few individuals I've lost, and I have just as many regrets on um, the ones that I allowed in that I knew
mm.
weren't good. Like my embezzler, when I found it, I was like, I knew this. I almost knew to look for it.
It, like, didn't surprise you.
No, it's like you did this to yourself, you know?
Mm,
And so that's been a big pivotal point for me this year is the whole not just the Jocko Willing thing, you know, like a man died on my watch and you know, I'm gonna own it all, but some of
right.
it is owning the failing at least instead of blaming of just I yes, I didn't do the initial interviewing. I wanted to do a team hire, whatever. They said she was good at insurance. No one actually really liked her as an individual. Um, but just I was the one who allowed it.
So, can
So
you give us any specific examples of how you've changed hiring? Because a lot of this sounds like
a
it's
lot.
hiring stuff. So, what did you do before hiring, and what do you do now that's different that's allowing you to avoid some of those mistakes?
Okay, before I get into that, I want to share a quote that my sister just sent me just this morning. It
Perfect.
really suits what we just said. It said, never get mad at someone for being who they've always been. Be upset with yourself for not coming to terms with it sooner.
Mm,
So the old me was upset that they weren't becoming what I wanted. You know, they weren't reading my mind. I wasn't a good communicator. The roles weren't clear.
mm,
And especially with the front office, what ends to get muddled is, or what tends to get muddled is they're like, well, we all overlap anyway.
mhm.
So I'm going to post this and she can do that. And then that person's going to take the innovation phone call. So then when you're checking with, oh, why are our new patient numbers down? Or what's your new patient conversion? Everyone's just pointing at
Pointing
each
fingers.
other. Like, I didn't really know I was supposed to do that. Or I thought she was going to call him back. Or I did take care of that. No, you left a message.
Mm,
And then you also didn't make any notes on the account. So when the person called back, these other couple people couldn't take it to completion.
right.
And then no one's owning it. Everyone's just blaming. So the culture of blaming, even if I wasn't partaking in it, I was I was still allowing it. So I would say that a lot now is just really, really, really reinforcing the roles
Mm,
and doing more careful interview questions on how they would handle certain situations, um, talking less. Before I would talk a lot about, oh, this is what's great about our office and
right.
why it's not like yours. And then also really, really, really diving into their previous references.
Okay.
Before I'd be like, I called one, they didn't call me back. Um, Now my eye goes to, wow, all of their offices are like 5 months experience,
Mm.
7 months. Then I went over here. Um, I call it a millennial thing. And even though
I'll
it's,
I'll be offended on behalf of all the millennials
yes,
for them
yeah,
because I technically fall into that category, so
yeah,
I'll be
it's
offended
just
for them.
jumping around that you're like, am I really going to be the landing spot for them?
Right,
Where, where I invest all this time in training, maybe I'll get a year out of them.
right.
Because I really I want more than that now. I want to have people that'll be with me a long time that I can really invest in. And I want to call it early on the ones that aren't cutting it.
Okay, I love that. I love
So
the looking at the work history, at the length, calling these people, really following up with previous employers. Um, is there any questions you asked specifically, letting them talk more? If I was applying right now, Richard Lowe, I lost my dental degree because, I screwed up. And so now I need to work at your front office. What would be some questions you would be asking me? I love getting as specific as possible on this podcast because sometimes people will say something that like, this is my favorite question to ask someone that maybe one of our listeners hasn't thought of?
I wouldn't say I have a general one. It kind of depends on the role.
Okay.
Like, so now if you were hiring for an assistant,
Okay.
I wouldn't say, oh, do you know Invisalign? Yeah, yeah, yeah. You know what attachments are? Uh-huh, uh-huh. Yeah, cool. So you can do those? Great. That would have been me before. Oh, you know Sarah? Cool. Okay. No, I'd be like, well, what do you know? Tell me your workflow. How did you? Because I heard so many people that assistants who wanted like $30 an hour because they knew Sarah, and you're like, sweet, oh my god, that would help me so much. And literally, they never freaking touched the machine. The
Right.
doctor did everything. They just knew how to pull it out of the oven after it was glazed or hit it with some spray glaze.
Mm,
And you're paying them for this quote skill, but
skill.
they don't know how to calibrate. And I've been with other assistants who do know that.
Mm,
So it's diving into what their said skill set is. What's your comfort level with Dentrix? If there was a recare coordinator, how did you manage recare? What software platform did you use? Oh, was your office one that called? Because some people who said that they were recare coordinators, especially because I've been practicing a long time, so I'm at almost 20 years. When I started, it was the Garfield postcard with the toothbrush. And the assistants would, or when the patients would check out, the front desk would have the Garfield postcard on their chart. The patient would fill out their address, a date 6 months from now, and then they would put it in let's just say 6 months from today is in June. They'd put it in the June spot. We had like a little Rolodex.
Right.
And in June, or in May, we'd pull all those postcards due for June and we'd drop it in the mailbox.
Right.
That was the recare coordinator managing recare.
Right.
So now it would be, how did you manage that? What was your level of responsibility? Tell me what you did with cancellations. Tell me how you'd handle this customer service issue. Do you know how to batch claims? I never asked anything before.
Mm.
It was,
I,
oh, you did Ventrix and you did recare? Okay,
I
great.
love that. Just the open-ended, you know, tell me more about that, and hearing what they say. What was your workflow? Is going to bring out so much more than just you asking a yes no question and then moving on.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. And it's just also I've had a lot of false leads, people who I still can't dissect if they were purposefully lying on their resume. Like, did you really think you were good?
right.
Because you really suck. Like, the ad is like, you want a dynamic superstar multitasker who gives elite customer service. And they're like, yes, that's me. I do everything for the patients. And meanwhile, ring, ring, they won't answer the phone. They get overwhelmed. You want me to check them out and look at this. And you're like, this is this is pretty basic front desk stuff. The phone's going to ring and
Right.
you'll know someone's going to check in soon. Have a seat. I'll be right with, like,
Right.
it's all normal stuff.
Right.
Number of highly paid employees, I'm talking front desk who wanted 32 to 35 an hour, who could simply not do more than just check in a couple patients. They weren't good with collecting. They weren't good with auditing the day. They weren't good with scheduling to production. So now if I was going to hire a treatment coordinator, mine now I trained up from, she was an ortho, so she didn't know any general dentistry, but it was explaining production blocks, time units, really checking in a lot, doing a lot. Chair slide, please come in with me on the new patient exam so you can learn some of my language.
Right.
Let's practice this. Oh, it looks like you're struggling with that. Maybe we could create some new explosion code for quick buttons for you. Would that make it easier? It's really dissecting down more now onto how to build them for success, and asking a lot of questions about their previous office.
Something I saw recently posted, I can't remember which dental Facebook page this was on, but it was a dental assistant like pay standard. So there was like, you get all the time someone coming to the table asking for a certain amount, and this
Mhm.
person had a checklist for like 3 different tiers of like, if a dental assistant can do this subset of skills, like the basics, then they're in the tier 1. If they can do this next set of skills, then they're in tier 2. And if they can do these advanced skills, then they're in tier 3. And so when someone asks for something, they're asking for a raise, they're asking for a certain dollar amount per hour, you can go back to this checklist and be like, "Okay, how can we verify that you know all these things? If you're able to, in fact, do all of these things at the standard that I want in tier 3, then we'll move you to that point. Uh,
Mhm.
but I'm gonna have to start you off here so that I can verify you've got these basic skills, then we're gonna have to move you up and verify you can do those middle skills and then move you to the advanced." I thought that was brilliant of, um, a way to have that conversation, but have it be tied to very specific measurables of, "Can you do these things? I need you to be able to do these successfully at the level that I expect,"
Yeah.
and setting those expectations up front that those skills are tied to compensation, I thought was really cool. So,
I would say I've done that differently this year. Especially with like one of my assistants, I took from $17 to 24
mm,
because I was like, we're going to meet often. My saying that goes along with that when I interview now is learners are earners.
mm,
So the more you want to learn, I'm all about empowering you. I want to take you as far as you want to go,
totally.
but there will always be compensation that goes along with that. And
And
so trying to get, I've also interviewed some this past year. The COVID change was really a fortunate time to really cleanse. Like you're sitting like, okay, I have to lay off everyone.
right,
So, but wow, gosh, this person, I don't think they're good for the practice.
right,
And then looking at their work, like, oh, let's send out some statements during COVID while we're closed. Wow, 60% of them were returned. Wrong address. Wow, this person's obviously not good at putting in apartment A on their new patient intake entry. Wow, they're really messing up getting their social. Wow, they really haven't put in the right breakdowns. Let's not have her back.
mhm,
Um, it just kind of ending up on this treadmill of trying to train bad habits when sometimes people are showing up as they are. And then you just have to say, this isn't working for me. I really need this.
Right.
And not milking them along for 9 months or a year and having become resentful on both sides. There's some assistants who only want to be chairside and suck spit and do instruments. And there's others that are like, I want to be your sleep apnea champion, and I want to get myofunctional training, and I want to, learn how to adjust orthotics and make bridges on the stair. Like sometimes you just have to, you know, um, not make a Chihuahua into a service dog. It ain't gonna happen.
Right. And I think that desire level, figuring out there's people's natural skill level, and then there's their desire to improve. And some people are the type that are listening to dental podcasts, and there are other people who are like, no, I got my degree. I'm going to do the bare minimum CE for the rest of my career. In dentistry, we even have that at a dentist level. Some people want to learn those skills. And so trying to turn someone who doesn't naturally want to improve and learn and grow into someone who does is almost impossible. And it's so hard to learn that because there's that balance of what can we train and what is untrainable. And and figuring that out and figuring out what's the culture of your office, that culture piece, and having a very standard for we need trainable, engaged people versus people who can just do the bare minimum, do the job, or at least say that they can. So you've been through that process.
Yeah, and I have culture in the toilet, 100% the toilet, where I didn't even want to come to work.
This episode is brought to you by Swell. So all of us who are already using Swell know that it crushes reputation management. It's like turning on a steady stream of reviews that requires no effort from your team and just works. It's amazing. Additionally, it makes it easy to stay in touch with all of your patients before and after their visits. And it even has a great way to set up a virtual waiting room. But there's more good news. Swell has a brand new version of their platform. And on top of being simpler than ever to use, you can now actually get patients to pay via mobile, which is incredible. The reason that Swell is so effective at getting reviews is they make it easy. They've now brought that same ease of use to paying for dental treatment even after patients have left the office. Mobile payments are a great way to text them a reminder so they can pay at their convenience right on their phone. You can pay via credit or debit card, ACH, or even Apple Pay or Google Pay with just a few taps. No more phone calls, no more chasing people down with emails and letters that always seem to get lost. And it gets better. This new release includes Swell Schedule, which is an easy way for patients to request an appointment time that works for them, so you can lock down those appointments quicker. Listen, Swell is one of those things that you just need to try it out, turn it on, see the results, and then you're converted and you're like, well, I'm never going to shut this off. Listeners of the Shared Practices podcast can try Swell for free for 30 days. No commitment. Just set it up, see the results for yourself before you pay anything. To take advantage of this offer, head to swellcx.com/shared practices. That's swellcx.com/shared practices. How did you self-diagnose? Because we've talked about your team. Like, it sounds like you've had some hires that were rough hires, that you've had turnover, you've learned lessons from. I think from our leadership season that we just had, one of the things I wanted to give people was the ability to self-diagnose, when is my leadership getting in the way of our practice success?
Yeah.
And so talk to us about, is there any moments that you kind of realized I could improve in these different areas, or I could be a better leader here? How did you figure that out? And then how did you decide what you wanted to do about that?
Um, so the culture was in the toilet like a good year and a half ago. And I retained, I had some long-term employees, like my hygienist were with me 5 years, but we'd had this rollover with assistants. And then the front would be, we had our loyal billing person who was doing treatment coordinating, but then she'd end up doing a lot of cleanup from other people's roles. So she was never able to be the manager that she was, that her title was. And she wasn't also investing in them either. It was like, I have no time to train you, but you're failing me. So I think, again, there were some good people that we lost because the culture was just, we were overbooked. things are busy. You can't say we really pride ourselves on customer service if you're scheduled to the point where you're running an hour behind.
Right.
And at some point I could be like, well, you guys overbooked me. Well, it's still my name, my reputation. The patients know that they're an hour behind. And also I'm the owner. Like, what am I going to do about it?
Right.
Saying you guys are screwed up again isn't going to help. So there was that reflection of how do I approach this so I wear my emotions on my face. So maybe this COVID thing's been good that I have like an N95 and a face shield that you can only see like my eyebrows.
Your poker game has improved
Yeah.
substantially.
It's so funny too. I had 2 patients yesterday. They're like, "You look great," and I'm like, do you mean my eyelashes look good?
These 4 inches of my face that you see.
Yeah, I could have like a horrendous cold sore. Like you literally can't see my face. But I think that I was careful with my words, but I wasn't careful with my body language or expression. I don't think they felt safe approaching me. And I wasn't involved in training. So even recently, when one of my assistants that I lost, we had a really good relationship. She had to move away for childcare after COVID. But I said to her, like, I'm going to have a new person on board with you, 2 weeks just shadowing you for you to dive into everything. Guess what? She's a horrible trainer. And so like, I want to be able to delegate those things.
Yeah.
But the other person, I'm like, wait, how do you not know this? Or didn't they show you our ordering, our tag systems? Nothing that's going to rock anyone's world if they've been it. No, she never showed me that. What about this? What about that? Nope. So how'd she show you to assess endo? She just said that your endo tubs are all green and then they're green tray. Wait, but you're with her whole day just going over endo. Like, that's all you got out of it? Like, so again, getting back to like, how am I setting people up for success? How do I want to onboard them? These are my expectations. Really interviewing a lot on that. Are you capable of this? And the biggest thing is learning when to correct. That's always been hard for me.
Yeah.
Because there's certain times where I would rather wait till the end of the day or be like, I don't know that they're ready to receive that today. Like, they don't look like they're having a bad day. Let me just address it at the end of the week and say, hey, there's some things that could have gone better this week. I would just blurt it out in the moment. And sometimes it's important, like, hey, the CEREC had an error signal up and I left to do 2 hygiene checks and I'm a patient. I just lost 30 minutes. Like, I thought the crown was milling and you were doing something else. Like, I need to know when I leave the room that you're doing your chart note. Let's post that complete so the front can get all the finances in order. Let's do this when I leave the room. Some of those you do correct in the moment, but having it with the right tone, where you're like, hey, gosh, now I'm going to be behind. So that's stressful. Can I show you what we need to look for? Like, I really tried to work on that spoke too.
And that right there, and you mentioned some really specific signs of that. One was your body language, that when you're stressed, when you're mad, you're upset, even though like words wise, what's coming out of your mouth is not reflecting that. The tone, the body language, they can sense that, and therefore that guardedness, their unwillingness to share and bring up problems and admit to fault, was not there. That's super hard. And that is that whole crucial conversation piece of how do I have difficult conversations and come out the backside with a better relationship, than you did going into that relationship. Usually, I mean, we all perform our worst in crucial conversations, and usually the relationship is worse after the crucial conversation. So if you can flip that around, that's the difference between a struggling leader and a high performing leader, is having those difficult corrective accountability conversations in a way that they feel safe throughout that. And when safety is gone, you can bring it back to safety. And then that they're more committed and you have a better relationship with them at the tail end of it. That's a lifelong process, work, home relationships in every front. But I think it's something that people don't even realize is possible, that you can reach that level where you can have those types of conversations and maintain that level of safety and create that culture. And those little micro interactions are what ends up forming your culture of your office, the stress level of your office, the ability for people to relax because they know that everyone's got their back and that if stuff happens, yeah, we're going to talk about it, and yeah, we're going to be held accountable, but in everyone's best interest. That's hard. That's something that we're always
It's
going to have to work on.
hard. And also just I've done a lot of like I got a second milling chamber and Serona, they pushed out a lot of stuff last year that had some defective parts and software, whatever. So you're like
Did you
trying
get
to run
the
out of time.
new one? The
I didn't get the prime mill. I got the new cone beam, orthofos cone beam,
okay.
and then I got all new sensors, Digidoc cameras at the end of
Oh
last
wow.
year, and then I got all new computers with Windows 10. And there were a lot of things that just wouldn't talk to each other right. So every
Oh,
day we're like, I can't take an X-ray today, and then everyone brings all the problems to you.
right.
And you're like, you think I freaking need this right now? Like, yeah, let me get up from my patient and figure out why it's still spooling, you know?
Right.
There were some stressful things that were just technology related this year. And again, sometimes when I would wear it, I would then pull them aside at the end of the day. Please understand, I'm not frustrated with you. And they're like, oh, no, 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 I didn't think so. I'm like, it's just really hard for me because I want to give you an answer. And I also have these other things I have to do, but please don't take that personally. And I think that's been an important change for the practice too.
Cool.
Or sometimes they're like, God, I just felt so bad for you because I could see how upset you were, but I knew it wasn't me. I just want to know how I can help you.
Right.
And so now I'm trying to learn more about everything. So now if there's an error issue before, I'd be like, we'll call IT. Now I'm like, I need to know how you fix that. I need to know what you troubleshot with that. If you were calling Serona support, what did they say?
Mm.
What will this look like? How do we bypass this error next time? And so just really trying to dive into some of that stuff so that I can grow and be a better resource has
Right.
been helpful for my growth as a leader. What was the flip side of things though, and I think what's harder since you have sometimes a younger audience too, people who want to come right out and jump into leadership, is at least for me where I took 11, 12, almost 12 years of working with others, I worked with a lot of horrible bosses. And they were like really well liked, right? So here I'm the leader, and when my culture was in the toilet, people I knew liked me as a person. Maybe we had friction with me as a boss,
Right.
but I'm like, dude, I worked for such jerks, like
Right.
instruments, yelling, screaming, or the other ones who would like leave for lunch. You could never knock on their door, completely non-confrontational, never engaged in anything. And they're like, my boss is so great. And you're like, but like they were never holding you accountable.
Right.
Their AR looked like crap, 300 grand AR, and they weren't having sit downs with the office manager. But boy, April was their loyal office manager for 17 years, and you can barely keep someone a year. Like it was really hard for me to compare and contrast what I'd seen with
Right.
what was going on for me. It's like, well, all I'm doing differently is holding a higher standard and trying to have more communication.
Mm.
And it is an extra level of challenge as a female.
No, and there's so many things to unpack there that you just said.
Yeah.
So the first is, uh, if you ever are in doubt that you can be a practice owner, go work for some other people that are just awful people, awful business owners, awful dentists, and you're like, man, we could do this better. I love that you bring that to the table. If you're like, it's not like these people were great at being practice owners at all. In
No.
fact, it was just they either yelled at people and threw instruments and ruled with fear, or they just didn't care and the practice did well enough that it covered the myriad of mistakes that they were ignoring.
And I can't dissect it on the back end of like, how did they get someone to stay for 6 years?
Right.
Like, it was a horrible environment, but the hygienist was best friends with the front office. So did they just stay because they loved working with each other and ignored the doctor? So part of my self-reflection is still trying to go back in time with what I've learned from and what I've seen. We're like, why is this a struggle for me?
Right.
And I think that's one thing we talked about in some of the forums is I'm so involved in it because I want to learn so much from other people.
Yeah.
Even like with the whole COVID thing, like, did you get PPP relief? Well, how'd you get this? Like, I think there's such a collaborative nature we can have.
Totally.
And that's one part where people get really insular. Even with some of my closest friends, they won't share it with me.
Mm.
And then later, like when I'm done sharing like some of the things I've been through, then they're like, yeah, it's been actually tough for us right now because I had two in my front that walked out and then one did this. And I'm like, why wouldn't you say that sooner? Aren't we good friends?
Right.
I think there's this level of where people want to like showboat with just our like, look at our great practice and blah blah blah. So
But
I
I know
wanted to like,
hopefully in the mastermind you've seen like one thing that we are in shared practices is oversharers.
yes,
Um,
I love that.
good, bad, and ugly. All of the above. And so when we have those mastermind calls and people are putting their practice there and we're doing a hot seat, it's not like, hey, look how great my practice is. It's usually here's all my problems. Here's how I'm trying to grow. Here's what I'm trying to do. And laying it all out there in a way that we can all help and support. So hopefully you've experienced some of that in the mastermind.
I have, and it's there's so much like when we get back to the hiring thing.
Mm,
So I did the COVID cleanse, right? I think so many people did. It was like, who do I want to bring back?
right.
And are these people going to come back? They don't seem like they're going to come back. Like between childcare, I had a few that just were loving the unemployment. And you're like, I will definitely not hear from them until after July.
Right. Once that runs out, then all of a sudden they'll be calling. Yeah.
Yeah. And that happened. Um, I had some that I was really questioning their performance. Here in California, with the job market the way it was pre-COVID, and it's even more demanding now,
Right.
um, everyone wants just these crazy amounts of payroll. And so my biggest cost to the practice is payroll.
Right.
I've had times where it was 44%. And yeah, you could be like, yeah, but you produced over 170,000 this month. It's like, yeah, but like all of it's going out because I
Right.
have to have all these employees and this assistant's $37 an hour, but they really don't do more for me than my $22 an hour employee.
Right.
How can I get more like the $22 an hour one? So I was dissecting their payroll costs, attitude, and then it was also an opportunity for people. Uh, friendships, everything to show their true colors.
Mm,
We're all alone in our houses, and then there's the friend who won't return your text message, and you're like, "What are you doing?"
right.
Like
What are you up to?
you're alone in your PJs. You're probably watching Netflix, but you're so suffering from being stuck. Like, how is that different than what I'm going through? Like, why
Right.
why are we not reaching out to each other? Are you okay? How are you doing? Do you need anything? So I really dissected all my relationships
Mm,
and really wanted to dive into like who I am. And it's the first time I was already on the verge of that in 2020 with this whole it's going to be my year of explosion and 2020 vision. And then everything, you know.
right.
So for me, it was this is the first time I've had to dive into my practice. And there was a lot I saw that I didn't like.
Mm,
And then it was owning it like, well, you never looked at this before. So you let so and so do it, and even though she's been with you 7 years and you think she's the most loyal employee, dude, I don't know what I don't know if she was drinking when she did the accounts, but there's so many things that don't make sense. So I've been the one cleaning up the credits and the AR reports, and we got our membership plan off the ground and created some new roles and just really changed unfortunately, just from looking at everything. I don't think I fully understood everything before. I didn't. I mean, I would always check in verbally. Oh, like, how's the AR looking? What about this? But I never said like on Fridays we're going to print an aging claims report because
mm,
I had some claims that my insurance coordinator who was working remote literally since April they've just been sitting in insurance aging claims. They
mm.
just need like a narrative.
Just money
And you're like,
sitting on
if
the
you're
table.
supposed to be doing accounts and you're doing it remote, how is all this getting past you?
Right.
Like, or how are you posting a payment and then not reconciling the account? Like, if there's an additional AR balance, you're not, oh, let me post this, I'll send a statement. Or let me post this, our financial policy says it when they are a new patient, and I'll call you and I'll collect it. And then when I check them in too, I would have said, hey, this is just an estimate. And, we're hoping for this, but there might be additional more. And I'm happy to explain that to you, but I'm happy to collect that. Or if there's a credit, then post to credit and then print the ledger and I'll write them a check back if it's a certain amount. Nothing. It would just be like a random posting. And then she had 2 months where she somehow missed all of the EFTs.
Mm.
And you're like, well, you can work the normal hours.
Right.
So I guess I'm supposed to be checking that now. Like, how do you check all these things? And that's what was my struggle as an owner. Like, am I really supposed to be doing this much? Shouldn't I be
So
able to trust and let go? And so my advice now is yes, you can trust and let go, but it's just taking time and training. And so I hired some new team, and they've been a lot more from scratch training. And I did enlist the help of a front office trainer,
hmm,
um, because I'm mostly out of network, and as of January 1, I'll be completely out of network with everyone. But getting the right payment tables, how to read the fax backs so that we can, because we're not going to collect 100% up front in in our practice. It was kind of I love the saying FIFIO, like
okay,
you utilize your insurance like a PPO. We know how all that works, and we're going to do our best to estimate the out of network payment, and maybe we can wait on our check out of network for that portion, where we're going to collect this much more upfront. So I'm not fully there yet,
right,
but that's a lot of work and a lot of training, because where they usually fail is on their estimations of what they're supposed to collect when the patient checks in. So
totally,
you're either ending up with large AR balances with an upset patient, or someone not scheduling because they're trying to collect too much up front
right.
and they're not explaining the value or the process. So there's so much training that went into that. So the coach was really helpful because she's from a fee-for-service background with getting them converted on the language.
That's huge. And I think off air we were talking about how you've not had, and you've shared this, not had a great experience delegating things where it's like, hey, take care of this. And sometimes George talks about that and talks about, I don't want to hear about this, or this is your job. I want you, go for it. Um, there there's a couple things that come to my mind as we talk about this. Number one is delegating with a really small team is hard because if you don't have an office manager who really knows the ins and outs, can hold people accountable, can train, um, then it's everyone just kind of individually doing their job. So
Yes.
without an office manager that deeply understands and can do all of those things, delegate, hold people accountable, and train, um, it's kind of a gamble. And then every time you have turnover, it's a massive nightmare because there's not someone to hold that down and create
Yeah.
stability
Yeah.
with the systems. And so it sounds like you've come from a spot of two operatories. You're growing into a bigger practice, hiring team members all along the way, um, but without this role of a practice leader who is handling all the business stuff. And you're stepping into that role right now, of understanding deeply all these things, training your team members on all these things, holding them accountable. Do you have an office manager right now, or is it kind of your
So
front desk team?
she was with me from the beginning. And I think the skill set's there. She just was never good as a manager.
Mm,
So all of our conversations, I mean, I would say I was like George. I would have these weekly check-ins. This is what I see. Tell me the problems. Oh, this person's going to need an accountability conversation. Why don't you here's our 30, 60, 90-day write-up. Have them fill this out. This is the process. And then later it was, I go to fire them and none of them had been filled out or signed. It's like, well, I did talk to them. It's like, what, dude, like now this is an HR nightmare. Like,
right.
or
In California, which is a harder
yeah, or your
state
conflict
HR
where you're
wise.
waiting for them to walk out, and now I'm trying to go through their employee file, and wow, this isn't signed. Oh, they never signed their welcome packet. They never signed their employee handbook. They never like. It was just like I delegated this, and I'm like, my only HR blunders were where she just missed steps,
Mm,
and then I'm like, well, no problem. Like I'm here. I'm going to do their firing, and then it's like, you didn't do this. We talked about it like 20 times.
right.
So I know that I can delegate it again, but it would not be without me saying like, I need the employee packet completed by Friday. Please put it on my desk. Like I
Yeah.
need to see it before it was like, okay, well, cool.
So you still have, that person in that role, or
No, so she's one that with COVID and everything, we had put her on accounts because
okay,
she's always very well liked for the patients, seeing no accounts, and then just a lot of people changed and didn't respond well to COVID.
yeah,
And I don't homeschool. My son is still young, and my nanny was able to stay with us, and his preschool reopened. So I don't have that burden of trying to balance everything I'm doing. So I just know that the ball was dropped in more ways than you could even drop a ball.
Totally.
So yeah, I've moved her out of that as well. Just I was hopeful for it. I think that billing can work remote, but again, it's as a leader, what are your systems for check-in? Because this is our pay take-home money.
Right.
Like I just wrote off at the end of the year. I'm like, let's just write this off. But there was more than 15,000 I had to write off because she never sent a statement. She didn't process their claim, or their claim was rejected like last January.
Right.
And what am I going to say now? Hey, we called you twice, but you still owe us $1,200, and we estimated what we were going to collect.
Right.
Like they're just pissed. They're like, "F you! You can't tell me that." And so I'm eating it, but that's my take home money.
Totally.
So as a leader, like I'm ultimately the one affected, and that's been the biggest phase of growth. Is like, um, you're like, how did I let this happen?
Right.
Like I was watching. Everyone watches a lot of like Netflix and stuff on heroin addiction.
Oh.
And it was I trained in Boston, so it was in Cape Cod, was one of the highest areas. And it all starts, by the way, with oxycodone from the dentist or the doctor. They all were like, once I ran out of those pills, it was just cheaper to get heroin. So anyway, there were the kids that were like the bad kids to begin with. And then there were the kids that were the good kids. And then now they're like junkies with track marks who can't hold a job and they have black teeth. And the moms are like, God, he was like a soccer star. And until he got those wisdom teeth out, that's when his life went south. It's like, but was it? Were there signs sooner?
Right.
Were you engaging with your son, or did you just go to his room all day and you never interacted with him? I don't know. So for me, I feel like the parent who was hands off, and now I have a heroin addict on my hands where you have to own it. You're like, dude, that's my kid.
Right.
And so I don't think I fully owned it before. And it makes me sad only that I didn't call it out sooner because of the money that I've written off by being very involved in the wrong way.
Right. And I think there's also a couple of phases of ownership. Of one phase that a lot of people want to skip is the understanding everything that's going on in your office at a deep level, and knowing how to hold people accountable for all of those things. And that's a phase that sounds like you're deep in the middle of and coming out the other side of truly understanding all the systems. And a lot of people just want to come in, do the dentistry, and the business takes care of itself. And that is where that's a big red flag for if someone should be a practice owner, is if you never want to learn the business stuff, if you never want to learn all of these, the things that you've been talking about with claims and AR and how to run all of this in the system and hold people accountable, probably shouldn't be a practice owner, because at some point you need to understand it deeply. And then later, once you have someone who is a better fit for that office manager role, then you can step back from a lot of the day-to-day details. But everyone wants to jump straight from new practice owner to I'm stepping back and I, trust that they handle it. And that's a recipe for disaster. It's a recipe for embezzlement and tons of writing off stuff that could have been collected.
Yeah. And
But
it really affected my practice model too, because I stepped away from, I had RDAEFs who I would literally like prep the crown and then be like, peace, I'm going to go in another room and do something. Oh, I'm going to get good production now. And look at how efficient I am by letting my assistants do this. And then I'm just going to go home at the end of the day and trust that everyone wrote their charts and everything was billed correctly. And yes, I'll print out my day sheets. I'll thumb through them. Like now it's like a fine tooth comb, especially after embezzlement. But I had that. And the number of crown redos I have, or, oh, we're ready to cement. Oh, great. You got to see film. We're going to do this. Oh, yeah, great. And then I'm going to run out of here and I'm going to go do something else. And then now they're back on recall and there's a chunk of cement still there and an open contact. And you're like, I didn't really check it. Like I was like, let me get in. Let me just do the part that I only have to do. Let me just squirt the cement in. And you got this during cleanup. Yep, doc, I got it.
right.
Good. Okay, well, just don't dismiss them without another film. If there's a piece of cement, make sure you take another one till it's removed. Oh, yep, I'll do that. And then, you're like, hey, so to the patient, this area bleeds a lot. Oh, I can see there's just a little something up here. Let me, it's, those moments are for me pain points because
Yeah.
it's still my work. I can't say to someone else, oh, my assistant milled that crown and their design was off. It's like, you know, or you go in to seat it and you run around, oh, it looks pretty great, thanks. And then bite down and it's like 4 millimeters hyper occluded. And then you're like, let me see your design now. Like, so getting my workflow to where you can trust and delegate, but sometimes for me, it just wasn't worth it because it was more work on the back end
Right.
than if I just managed it the whole way through. So I don't want to do the nuances. I have a friend that I became closer with during COVID, and she's like, I don't have any of those problems. I set batch and send all my claims at night. And she's there till like 8 at night. She's my age. And I'm like, what? Why do you want to do that?
Right. Right.
Like, you shouldn't be doing your own claims.
No.
So for me, like cleaning up all the credits, it took me like, it honestly took me like 4 hours to clean off $30,000 of false credits.
Wow.
All of the stuff that was posted wrong.
Right.
And but now I'm going to the front and saying, here's the mistake. I print out this ledger because I want you to see the mistake. And then let's talk about it. Do you understand? And then great. And then I fixed it. Don't worry. But now we understand, so we won't have this mistake repeated. I just didn't know the mistakes were going on
Right.
because I wasn't looking, right? So it's interesting. So that's been a big thing for me, is just really learning these systems and learning how to dive in. Even the CEREC, like I wanted to just hire someone because I didn't know how to like clean it. None of it's actually that hard,
No, it's not. Yeah.
but I thought it was, and it
Right.
was also just one more thing that I couldn't manage. So I'm creating flow systems for like lab case logs, or like if you have an implant case next week, who's in charge of getting the parts?
Right.
What's our process? It's always really fun when someone's in the chair for their implant impression and there's no parts.
There's no,
Isn't that fun?
there's no impression coping. You're like,
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna evaluate for yeah,
yeah,
cool. We're gonna get this. I'm glad we checked that out. Everything's good, so we can get those parts ordered and get you back. Like there were just all these bumps that everyone goes through. I don't think there's any like, there are a few practices that are like these perfectly well-oiled machines. And I think like I love Paul Etchison. I think one of his issues with success, or one of his things, he's had a long-term team. If
right.
I had people that I had groomed now that I hope will stay with me for 6 years, then my job will get easier.
Well,
But
and that building that machine, um, Paul built that from scratch as a startup, and had each team member and culture. And I know he said, I've talked with him offline, he has a ton of issues too. Like, don't get me wrong, like
yeah,
Paul still has drama and problems and all of that, but that machine takes a long time to build. And if it's not there, if you've inherited a mess of a machine, um, it's hard, and
yeah,
it's a lot of work, and that is the work of ownership. And if you're doing that alone, if you're doing that without support, without coaching, without training, without a mastermind, without, you've hired someone to help train your front desk team, training is not something that a lot of dentists are good at. A lot of dentists, even if they understand deeply the front office systems, how do I explain this to someone while I'm doing all these other things? It might not be your strength. So this process of diagnosing your practice, of here's where things are falling through the cracks, and then how do we improve this, a lot of times takes metrics. It takes a third party to look at this and to help you walk through it, because doing it by yourself is lonely, frustrating, and exhausting.
it is. And do you want me to tell more failures? Because so then getting my CPA. I had an accountant, from scratch startup. She's in my networking group. Nice little quirky lady. I was like so happy I was getting returns. I don't know taxes. Like I
Right.
don't know tax law. I'm like, here are my receipts. Here's this. We would like meet when she was here once a week. Like the way she set up my depreciation schedules, and the way she had all these like she categorized everything wrong. So like
Oh,
my lab stuff was in the wrong like supply,
oh
and
goodness.
my whole QuickBooks was a disaster. But she came in, she logged in. I was like, I got 20 grand back this year. Yeah. She jacked my depreciation schedule. So all my tax for the next however many years, I was taking these losses and stuff that I didn't need to.
Mm,
It wasn't strategized correctly from the beginning.
right.
So, but that's still on me. I just didn't know what to look for. I didn't even know what to ask.
So we're
So,
running
she didn't either.
right.
Oh,
Well,
yeah,
yeah.
I've been to dentist before.
Oh goodness.
And you're like, okay, good. Okay, great.
So I want to, I really like taking a step back on a lot of this and asking kind of this overall question. Now that you've been an associate for a period of your career and you've been an owner for a period of your career, and neither of them were perfect, and you're continually improving on the owner side, just like all of us. Talk to someone that hears this because they've just heard all of the things that can be frustrating as an owner, and I really appreciate that you've shared all of those. Is is ownership still worth it? And if someone is hearing kind of all of these issues and problems and like, man, financially, is it worth it? Headache wise, stress wise, what would you tell that person now with the perspective that you have?
I would tell them to what I wish I had was the training that is accessible now.
Right.
Like to do a program like yours or a program like TLP, or even if Bruce Baird's program was perfect for them, Breakaway, something that's going to give you an introduction to all that's in front of you.
Mm.
Because there's a lot that can be avoided, right? So there's I would say starting out on the right note and really asking yourself if you can handle it. I like that someone said just because you have a kid doesn't mean you're meant to be a parent.
Right.
That's true for practice ownership, right? So like, do you want to deal with all this shit? Like for me, what makes me a little different too is I don't want to do a group practice, like a multiple practice model. My husband's like, you're just going to build this one up and open another one. I was like, trust me, I won't.
Right.
So really knowing what it is that what do you want?
Right.
Like even this year, my vision was all over the place because I'm like, do I want to just be fee for service and have lesser numbers but higher take home? Like what am I after? I don't think I even had that answered. It's like, oh, I have 10 team members and maybe I want 15, and but some of these doctors want to be a half day a week, and I don't. I like being a dentist. So I would say to someone, I mean, I can tell you people I've met that I'm like, you should not.
Yeah.
Like super introverts who don't want to dive in. They just want to show up and go home. And I met some older people too that I looked at their practices, bring them on, and they had charts stacked on their desk, and it was like a huge mess, and their AR was horrible, and they were just like, I don't know the front. I don't even know how to turn the compressors on if my assistants aren't here. And if they had team turnover, it was catastrophic
Oh
because the
yeah.
doctor was like, I don't know how to do anything.
Right.
And one of them in particular, he opened up a bunch of practices, and this poor guy, I don't think he's even going to be able to retire. He's like 70 something because he's taken on just debt, and he owns 3 practices. And just recently I went by one of them and like, it was just gone. So I'm like, did he consolidate them? Did he die? Like I was like Googling obituaries.
Trying to figure out what happened.
He didn't die, but I don't know what happened. And people are going through these struggles. And I think COVID was a good call to action of like, what am I going to do?
Yeah. This was awesome. Challenges that you've had, how you've grown as a leader, how you've grown as a practice owner, and that you're in a better place right now, that you know what you want and need. You've got your standards of, I am not going to hire a person unless they're trainable. Turnover is always painful. All we can ask of ourselves is, okay, can I make less of these mistakes? I really appreciate you coming on. This has been awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Nicole Vane, for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me.
We'll talk to you next time on the Shared Practices podcast.